Morning. It's Tuesday, June 1st, and yesterday morning I heard a disturbing blurb on the radio, and it had to do with the New York State law on Holocaust education. I didn't catch the blurb at first, so I spent most of the day trying to find it, and I'll tell you all about that later. So I want to talk now about the state of knowledge of what people know about the Holocaust at this point, some 76 years after the event. Article titled, "Why Don't More New Yorkers Know What Happened in the Holocaust?" And this is a new study that reveals troubling misbeliefs and knowledge gaps at a time of rising anti-Semitism and white nationalism. In September, the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, which is an organization that negotiates and distributes compensation for Holocaust survivors. They ran a survey to determine the knowledge and awareness of the Holocaust in the United States. And the survey was directed at people between the ages of 18 and 39, and it encompassed all 50 states. And there were 11,000 United States residents that received this survey. This survey was the first effort to measure Holocaust education across the millennials and the Gen Z in the country. It had 36 questions. Questions like, have you ever seen or heard the word Holocaust before? In which countries did the Holocaust take place? And what level of school were you in when you learned about the Holocaust? And then there were personal opinions and values. Do you think it's acceptable for an individual to hold neo-Nazi views? And that's just a small percentage of the questions that were asked. Report is not particularly good. In fact, 63% of the respondents did not know that 6 million Jews were murdered in a genocide that ended just 76 years ago. And New York was listed among the states with the lowest Holocaust knowledge scores. And that's depressing, considering that New York is only one of a handful of states that mandates Holocaust educations in the K-12 schools. That's a depressing fact, given that New York and New York City have the highest population of Jews in the world outside of Israel. I want you to listen to these astounding facts about New Yorkers. 19% of the respondents from New York, more than any other state, believe that the Jews caused the Holocaust. That's unbelievable. Also, compared to the national average, twice as many New Yorkers believe that the Holocaust did not happen. Because also believe that people still talk too much about the Holocaust. On top of that, more New Yorkers believe that it's okay to hold neo-Nazi views. Very embarrassing statement for a kid to hear, a kid who grew up in the Bronx in a Jewish neighborhood. Throw a big damper on the New York educational system if our Holocaust history classes are not getting through to people. But then we find out that they were never asked in this survey if you grew up in New York. You got a survey because you live in New York now. But if you didn't grow up in New York, you didn't go to New York schools, and therefore you didn't have a New York education. So that is something that could skew the answers differently. Obviously, if you grew up in Wyoming or Montana, you might come to New York with an entirely different view and an entirely different educational level with respect to the Holocaust. And I don't know if Wyoming and Montana are the states that could be blamed for this. I'm not blaming them. I'm just citing that as a crazy example. The survey also indicated that only 52% of New York respondents, and that was less by a couple of percentage points than any other states, first heard of the Holocaust at school. But New York had the highest percentage of respondents who first learned about the Holocaust on social media. Right now, I'm thinking that we can't take this survey very seriously. It points to several issues that are undermining effective Holocaust education throughout the state of New York and probably throughout other states. But most states don't have an education law concerning the Holocaust. So the Holocaust education mandate and the curriculum guidelines are very non-specific. So the implementation is inconsistent across the teachers and the districts. So if you do that, then you're effectively not doing much good at all. If you leave it up to the individual teacher or the individual school district to decide what the appropriate methodology is for Holocaust education, you're doing a disservice to those you are trying to educate. If we have such a curriculum in New York City that we want to educate Holocaust, then there should be a standard. You wouldn't want people going into a Regents for mathematics or science or history or English without having a curricula that was standard throughout the state. And the same should hold true for Holocaust education. Maybe we need to have standards and maybe we need to have a Holocaust Regents. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? And it seems to me that if it's haphazard, then teachers may not be getting the support that they really need. They may not be getting the materials that they really need to teach about this complicated historical event, this dastardly deed that took place 76 years ago. And then, of course, we have the effects of social media. If we have a population of students who can get on social media and check anything out that they want, and they go out to social media to study the Holocaust, to review something, and then they fall under the spell of the Holocaust denial and distortion and the white supremacy that is rising in online spaces. Then you get situations like the examples that showed up in this test. You get people who believe there was no Holocaust. You get people who think that the Jews caused the Holocaust. So New York has to, if they are going to continue to do Holocaust education properly, they have to have a statewide curriculum that is updated and takes into account the nonsense that is being spewed on social media. And that's what I want to say today, that even though we may have a Holocaust education system in place in our schools in New York, it will not work very well if it's competing against the many outside influences that the younger generation can come in contact with. And so I leave you with those distressing facts this morning, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.